All right, cool. Well, let's get this show on the road. Hello, everyone. Again, I am Faraz Abdul. I'm coming in from Trinidad and Tobago. Today, we're going to be enjoying a talk by Derek Keats entitled "The Dinosaur in My Tree: the origin and evolution of modern birds." And it's something that's very interesting to me as well, because, of course, as with many little boys when you're growing up, I very much was in love with dinosaurs, and I still am, clearly, because we're involved with birds. And Derek is going to explain a lot about this correlation in this talk. As usual, any questions that you have, please put them in the chat, and we can attend to them after the presentation. Yeah, so again, welcome. And Derek, you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Faraz, and you'll keep me honest and on time and all those things, hopefully. I have no idea how long this is going to take because, when you do these presentations for the first time, you tend to probably overstuff them a little bit. So I'm going to talk about the origin and evolution of modern birds. I'm going to focus primarily on the Mesozoic. I'm not going to talk about really the evolution of modern birds in the Cenozoic, so it's just going to mostly be about the Mesozoic. Sorry, I got interested in this when I was putting this children's book together with Esther, and I didn't want to just write a children's book that copied what other people copied from other people who copied it from other people. I wanted to actually have an understanding of what I was writing about, and so I started reading research papers, and I read well over 300 research papers in the little while that we were working on this book. I had a few conversations with paleontologists as well. I managed to find a few paleontologists online and got to talk to them. And I got quite obsessed with the early evolution of birds. And by early, I should probably say it's not just early, because it's more than half of the existence time of birds, but it is a fascinating subject. And I tried to pull together something that could give you a kind of a summary of where we are with our understanding of the early evolution of birds and what kinds of birds were around way back in the Mesozoic. So that's really what the focus is going to be on. And I guess I have a cautionary note first, and that cautionary note is when you see like this AI generated image that I created for this talk here, a Tyrannosaurus with a bird on its nose, one gets the impression that Tyrannosaurus probably evolved into birds or something like that. But actually, birds come long time before T-Rex. But birds and T-Rex belong to the dinosaur clade Theropoda. They're theropods. And birds in the broad sense predate T-Rex by around 86 million years. So that's not a trivial amount of time. As I said, T-Rex is not in the line of evolution of birds. So I just wanted to clear that up first, because that's not what we are saying here, and that's not the message. Just there's some synchrony in their existence. So we're going to look at the geological history, and then we're going to look at the origin of dinosaurs briefly, very briefly. Then we're going to look at the origin of theropod dinosaurs also very, very briefly. We're going to look at the origin of feathers, because that's often considered the thing that is characteristic of birds, but of course it's not. We're going to look at the origin of flight feathers or pennaceous feathers. And we're going to look at the origin of the wishbone. We're going to look at, how do we know what we know? And there will be some little human interest things there as well. And then we're going to come back to the origin of the pygostyle, the thing that the tail feathers attached to. And then we're going to look at Mesozoic bird diversity, just scratching the surface, but hopefully give you a sense of what kind of birds were around in the Mesozoic. And then early birds, as you may know, had teeth in their bills, but so when did birds get toothless bills? When did the gizzard arrive? Another thing that we consider characteristic of birds. When did birds start singing or calling? and then what's the origin of the modern groups of birds, and look at some of the lineages since the end Cretaceous extinction, or the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, and just get a sense of what happened after that extinction event. Hopefully that's enough to keep us busy for a little while. So let's start with the geological history. We need to go back in time a little bit. So if you look back in time, you'll see there was the Paleozoic era with the Permian period that abuts up against the Triassic, and there's a sharp line here, and that sharp line means something. It means that there was a mass extinction. Sorry for my N going on the next line there. The mass extinction happened at the end of the Permian, so the Permian ended and the Mesozoic era started with this mass extinction that, if we go back in time and we look, we'll see that there's this thing called the Great Dying, as it is sometimes referred, the end Permian mass extinction, Permian Triassic extinction event. And we lost 57% of all families, 83% of all genera, 81% of marine species, and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. And I'm just going to move my camera over here so I'm not looking sideways. I'm talking. Yeah, so a lot of species were lost, and that brought in the Mesozoic era, and a lot of stuff happened in that time. Pretty much everything that led up to modern birds, that led up to modern mammals, that led up to angiosperms, flowering plants, eventually led up to grasses and grasslands, and all of those things got their start in the Mesozoic era. And of course, birds is the subject of what we're talking about today. And then the Mesozoic era ended with another mass extinction, which I think we probably all know about, and I'm not going to talk about immediately, but let's just go back and look at now the Mesozoic era and some characteristics of it. Sorry, when I updated my computer, I didn't install the font that I use for my text here, so there may be some weird looking text. So the Mesozoic era lasted for 186 million years. That's quite a long time, and it generally had a hot greenhouse climate, but obviously with significant climatic activity over a period of 186 million years, the climate doesn't ever stay the same. And the breakup of the supercontinent of Pangaea, with significant tectonic activity and climate impact of that happened. There was, in the background, there was the dominance of gymnosperms, archosaurine reptiles such as the dinosaurs, and it's the middle of the three eras since life arose on Earth, being the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic, which is the one we are in at the moment, the one we are probably ending. And it's sandwiched between these two significant extinction events, the Great Dying and the asteroid that hit the Earth 66 million years ago and wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs. Also, 75% of all plant and animal species became extinct at that time. And we refer to this as the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, or K2P event. And if we look at the, this is so annoying that my font is incorrect here. But nothing I can do about it now. We're looking at from the Permian to the Cenozoic. So the Mesozoic is divided into these three periods: the Triassic, which ended 201 million years, the Jurassic, which ended 145 million years ago, and everybody knows about the Jurassic, of course, and the Cretaceous, which followed the Jurassic, which ended 66 million years ago. And the Cenozoic era is where we live today. Started with the Paleogene, then there was the Neogene period, and the Quaternary that we're living in at the moment. So that's kind of the geological history of those time periods. They're not exactly to scale because I needed to fit them all on and get the words in, but they're close enough, I think, for what we're talking about today. So there was another mass extinction at the end of the Triassic, 201 million years ago, and it's that mass extinction that contributed to the changes that we see that eventually gave rise to birds and other dinosaurs. One of the really interesting things that happened in the Triassic was this Carnian pluvial episode. It happened about 234 to 232 million years ago. It was about a 2 million year time. And basically it rained. And it rained for between 1 and 2 million years. That's a lot of rain. Eh? And it was a time of global warming of 3 to 4 degrees as well. So everything was wet and hot and humid. And there was an interruption in the otherwise arid climate on Pangaea, because Pangaea, being a big continent with, lots of land inland from the sources of water, was very dry for the most part. But during the Carnian pluvial episode, it was very wet, and this wet climate gave rise to the conditions that ultimately led to the evolution of dinosaurs and the evolution of theropod dinosaurs. And it was primarily due to volcanic activity that pumped greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and created some warming, and that also created the high evaporation and condensation that led to all that rainfall. So then there was a mass extinction at the end of the Triassic. It was a smaller one, also due to large volcanic eruptions, mainly due to the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea again. And this led to increasing temperatures and especially pH changes in the oceans that led to a lot of extinction happening in the oceans. Global changes happened, including wildfires, and it's when we started to see the evolution of endothermy, what we would call warm-blooded like ourselves, and the evolution of feathers. That's where that got started. So it's a significant filter for the archosaurs, that is the group that dinosaurs evolved in. And let's see what happened. So if we go back to the Permian again, and we're not going to worry too much about what happened earlier. There's this ancestral amniote, that's the common ancestor of birds, reptiles, and mammals. And it gave rise to all of these lines. And in the Mesozoic, if we look at these lines in the Mesozoic, you can see that the main groups that already existed here were the dinosaurs, the pterosaurs, the crocodilians, and another line that contains all the other reptiles. So all of these groups already existed early in the Mesozoic, and you can see that the dinosaurs evolved during the Triassic after this period of essentially global warming and a little bit of rain, or a lot of rain. And the birds, the neoaves, arose within the dinosaur line. So birds are dinosaurs. That's why when we say the extinction, we don't say the extinction of the dinosaurs, we say the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Right. And then the other thing about this is that you'll see that Crocodilia and neoaves here are the only two lines of this from these Archosauria that still survive today. And that's why people often say that, well, crocodiles the nearest living relative to birds. They're not particularly near, but it's true that they are the nearest living relative to birds. Yeah, so all of the things that we are interested in happened from the Jurassic to the end of the Cretaceous. But the stage was set during the Triassic. So if we look at when dinosaurs started, they started in the Triassic. Theropods evolved not long after dinosaurs first came into existence. What about feathers? When did feathers first evolve? The first feathers were basically simple down-like and maybe mainly for insulation, for keeping warm or for shade, and not for flight. But once feathers existed, it was relatively easy to repurpose them, and evolution always acts when there's an opportunity. Something will get repurposed, and feathers falls into that category. So here is a I don't know how much of this you can see. You don't need to read the words, I guess. But if you look at the time frames here that we're talking about, and this is from this paper by Xing Xu and Paul Barrett, and it's in 2024, so it's pretty up to date. It's about as up to date as you can get a big picture view like that. And there's no guarantee that it's 100% correct because there's still a lot of work going on. But this gives us an idea. So we're looking at feathers. There were feathers all the way back to here. Basic feather type proteins were being produced. And so the first feathers, and I've drawn a dotted line there because they're mostly filamentous feathers. Simple branched feathers came a bit later, but the kind of feathers that we're talking about came about in this period here, between in the late Triassic into the early Jurassic. There were feathers as we would recognize them. So feathers predated birds, birds in the broadest sense, by a good few million years. So feathers aren't unique to birds. They're unique to birds today, but they're not unique in the history of the evolution of theropods and their relatives. And in fact, they may have evolved more than once. And there's evidence that some pterosaurs may have had feathers. They wouldn't have been flight feathers, but they may have had feathers. So there have been pterosaurs found with traces of feathers. So the first feathers, simple filamentous feathers, and you can see there that the theropods, early in the history of theropods, there were feathers. So there's feathers, and then birds themselves, so the things that we would call birds in the broadest sense, and that's including something like Archaeopteryx in it, arose about 150 million years ago. So towards the end of the Jurassic ended 145 million years ago. By the end of the Jurassic, there were already birds of a sort. So then we can ask, when did pennaceous feathers with their asymmetrical veins evolve? These are the feathers that are used as rectrices in flight and tail feathers. And when did they evolve? And were they only in birds? So let's look back here. You can see there's pennaceous feathers here. If you look here, you'll see there's pennaceous feathers. There's paraaves, which is over here. That's still not what we would call birds. Aviali is what we would call birds in the broadest sense. Paraaves would be birds and their relatives. And you can see that there were beginnings of pennaceous feathers already down here in the Peniraptors. So even flight feathers definitely predate birds by a few million years. So even flight feathers, even those pennaceous feathers that eventually became flight feathers, are not, they're not unique to birds. And here you can see this is what we would call birds, this group here. and like pennaceous feathers came before. So it goes back a long way, well into the Jurassic. One thing you'll note here is it talks about aves with a beak and a uropygial gland. That's just the preen gland, the gland that the birds get oil from, that they spread all over their feathers. Just in case you read that word up there and you don't know what it is, that's what it is. Right. So, yeah, my thoughts. I want to cry. I should have checked that. So we're going to look at a couple of groups of bird and bird relatives. We'll look at the dromaeosaurs, the Dromaeosauridae, the Troodontids, Troodontidae, the Enantiornithes, and of course aves, the birds. And we're going to look at we're going to start with some definitions, because I've been talking about paraves. Sorry, let me just go back there. I've been talking about paraves and showing you this and aviali and all of that. But let's just get to some definitions here. Paraves, that's a fairly inclusive group that encompasses the avialians and thus birds and their closest relatives, and also includes dromaeosaurs and troodontids, including the iconic dinosaurs like Velociraptor would be in this group of paraves. Unless, of course, you watch Jurassic Park, in which case that Velociraptor would belong to the Imaginalia, or Imaginosaurs, because they're not real. They didn't look like that. And then the aviali, the orange box here, is a narrow group that includes aves and their closest relatives among the theropod dinosaurs. So that would include the Enantiornithes and the true birds, and maybe the Troodontidae as well. And then aves, of course, is the class that contains all birds, characterized by feathers, beak, jaws, and the ability to lay hard-shelled eggs. Theropods, of course, is the bigger group. That's a large group of mostly carnivorous dinosaurs that includes birds and their relatives. And while not all theropods are bird-like, the group as a whole is relevant to understanding the evolutionary origin of birds. And then we talk about stem birds, which is the birds from the early part of the evolutionary tree that didn't have any living descendants. There's none of them alive today. None of their descendants are alive today. And crown birds are the common ancestor of all living species and its descendants, which together form the group Neornithes. So I hope that makes sense when we're talking about birds, because it can get quite chaotic if you start talking about birds and these terms don't have meaning for you. Hopefully that gives them some meaning. And then while we're taking this little sidetrack, I thought we could also look at how do we know what we know. And obviously this is from the discipline of paleontology. And it started with Archaeopteryx. That was the door opener. It was first named from a single feather in 1861, single feather fossil. And then a complete specimen was found in the same year. And it's a genus of bird-like dinosaurs in the broader Aviali group, birds and their other dinosaur relatives, as I said. And you can see that it's got claws on the wings. It's got teeth in the jaws, and it's got a long tail with tailbones, lots of tailbones, and they range one after the other. And it's got feathers that arise laterally out of those tailbones, not from a fused sort of triangular shaped tailbone that you get in birds, but all along the tail, the feathers coming out laterally. And it was about the size of a magpie or a small crow. And it was from the late Jurassic, so around 150 million years ago. Now, avialians 10 million years older have been found in China. So Archaeopteryx is no longer the first. That was not good. Electricity went off. Can you guys still hear me? Paras, can you still hear me?
Yes, hearing you
Okay.
quite well.
Okay, we just had an electricity glitch. I hope it doesn't go off. Anyway, so there are older avialums now known, and Archaeopteryx no longer the oldest. But Archaeopteryx and work on Archaeopteryx has really helped us understand the evolution of what's called the Bauplan, which is apparently German for body plan. And so it's a lot of work that has been done on Archaeopteryx and is still being done. You can see this paper was published this year in May. So there's a lot of work on Archaeopteryx still going on and still informing our understanding of the early evolution of birds. Now I want to also mention the J-hole biota. This is a area where there are a lot of fossil beds that are found in, where there's a lot of birds and other organisms from the Cretaceous that are all found together in the same area. And it's in northeastern China. And all of it is living organisms, all living organisms from the lower Cretaceous ecosystems of northern China between 133 and 120 million years ago are found in this biota. So it's early, it's early Cretaceous. And a lot of what we know about the early life of birds is from this biota. It's a massive amount of fossils that are there, and it has driven the development of incredible paleontology institutes in China and elsewhere. And it was dominated by wetlands and lakes with seasonal fluctuation between semi-arid and mesic conditions, ideal conditions for the formation of fossils, especially when you have volcanic tephra being deposited in those wetlands and helping to preserve things for fossilization. So it trapped some of the best lower Cretaceous vertebrate fossils in existence, including about a 10 million year history of bird evolution, which is absolutely astounding. And I asked AI to give me a plot of the number of papers that were published on the evolution of birds by year since 1970. And this is what the graph looks like. And it starts in 1970 with the work by John Ostrom on Archaeopteryx. And he's the guy who kind of figured out the theropod bird link. And all of this begins to gain attention, but not much happens for 20, 30 years, between 20 and 25 years, not much happens. And this is when I went to university and did my undergraduate and did my PhD in biology. And look, there was nothing known about this stuff. So I didn't and couldn't study this in university because it was completely a vacant field. And then suddenly there was the discovery and analysis of these early feathered dinosaur fossils in China, and all of that work began to emerge. Then there was the discovery of Microraptor and a whole bunch of other dromaeosaurs that showed clearly the link between other theropods and birds. And then it really took off. It seriously took off. And it's carrying on today with modern technology helping continue the research, analyzing the fossils, positioning them, and finding out what they were. So this work is ongoing, and you can see that this year or last year, I guess it should be there, 700 papers on this topic that in 1970 had won. That's quite an amazing development. And then on a human interest story, there's also the punk rock connection. So Dr. Jingmai O'Connor is one of the most famous of the paleontologists who've worked on these fossils. She's an American citizen. I think she's still Chinese and American citizen, speaks both English and Chinese fluently, and is able to move between paleontology institutes in both countries, and has the most incredible, probably one of the most prolific researchers ever in history. And she also has a very strong interest in punk rock and calls herself the punk rock paleontologist. And there's this guy, Greg Graffin, who happens to be the founder of a punk rock band called Bad Religion, and also is a professor of zoology. And just have a look at his hairstyle, and have a look at this bird that she has named after him, Chiliana gruffnii, with the same sort of punk rock hairstyle. Anyway, that's kind of funny how science and our humanity sometimes go together in interesting ways. But Jingmai O'Connor has been so prolific, and I would say that her name was on at least a third, if not half, of all the papers I read. And then, so let's go back now to analyzing some more of the stuff. When did the wishbone arrive? Because we consider the wishbone or the furcula a characteristic of birds. It's a forked bone that's found in most birds, but it predates birds, as it's found in some of the non-avian dinosaurs. In birds, in all of them, it strengthens the thoracic skeleton, but for birds, it strengthens it for the rigors of flight, and it's part of the system responsible for lifting the wings during the recovery stroke when birds are doing powered flight. So it evolved earlier in non-bird dinosaurs, but evolution took it and used it to help the birds fly better. And then what about the pygostyle? So the pygostyle is this set of bones that are at the back end of the bird. If you have ever cut up a chicken, you'll see there's this little triangular thing at the back of the chicken where the tail feathers attach. It's made out of the last 5 or 6 caudal tail vertebrae. And the tail muscles, fascia, the tail feathers are all attached to that. And as a result, the tail feathers come out of the bird straight back, but they can be splayed and spread and moved in different ways to help the bird fly. And the Archaeopteryx, as I said before, the feathers came out of the side of the tail. Sorry, this is a rather bad AI generated image, but it's something like that. Whereas modern birds have the tail feathers, coming out and extending straight back. And this likely originated twice, if not more, in the early Cretaceous, around 140 to 130 million years ago. And it's found in a couple of groups, including some of the sister groups to modern birds. So it may have evolved more than once, but there's a group called the Confucius ornithy, which has got more linear. It's got a pygostyle, but it's more linear, and so it's not fused into this kind of triangular or pyramid shape. So it probably did evolve more than once. And so yeah, the Oviraptorosaurus probably supported a fan of tail feathers that they used for display. So there was a bit of a pygostyle there, and then the Confucius ornithy, as I said. The Confucius ornithidae, they had a dagger-like fused tail vertebrae, but it didn't, and it wasn't very long, but it wasn't the pyramid shape like modern birds. And modern birds have this plow or pyramid-shaped pygostyle. And Hongshanornis is an example of an early bird with that that kind of pygostyle. So it goes back a long way as well. And interestingly, there's some genetics that suggest that the origin of the pygostyle is probably a pleiotropy. That is, it's a genetic mutation that affected a whole bunch of things at the same time. So it affected the number of vertebrae, it affected the length of the vertebra, and it affected the fusion of the vertebrae together. So it's one gene complex that does all of that together, which makes it sensible that it could have evolved more than once. Right, so we're going to now look at some Mesozoic bird diversity. And we're going to look at the dromaeosaurids, the troodontids, the let me try that again, enantiornithes, and of course Aves. So the Dromaeosauridae is a family of feathered theropod dinosaurs. Think Velociraptor, but not the Jurassic Park version. And here's an example: Pyroraptor olympius, and it's a small to medium-sized feathered carnivore. And you can see that it's covered in feathers, and it's got these pennaceous feathers here that would, in birds, eventually, I guess, become the feathers that help with flight. But it's also got this very long tail with no pygostyle. And it's got modifications to the forelimb that allow for seizing of things. So it's got these claws that it can use to grab onto things, very sharp claws. And as I said, it's got pennaceous feathers. And yeah, so you can see that it's not a true bird. It's not a in the direct line of the birds, but it has a common ancestor, and you can see that, you know, it took feathers in a direction that looks similar to birds, but it's different from birds. And of course, nothing from the Dromaeosaurs survived the extinction event. And the name means running lizards, right? So, and then there's a Troodontidae, which starts to look a bit more like a bird. This is Liaoning venator, which is obviously from that Jehobiota. Liaoning being one of the areas in China where these fossils are found. And it's a clade of feathered theropod dinosaurs, striking anatomical similarities with Archaeopteryx and other and primitive dromaeosaurids. And they were probably mostly carnivores with some omnivores or herbivores, and they also had pennaceous feathers, but they're a little closer to birds than the dromaeosaurs, but they're not true birds. But it gives you a sense of what was going on at the time around the birds during the Cretaceous, that final period within the Mesozoic where birds, literally took off, figuratively and literally took off. And most of the fossils were from what is now the Northern Hemisphere or Asian sites, with only a single tooth found in Gondwana. That doesn't mean that the bird the animal didn't occur there. It just means that there haven't been any fossils found. And then this is the most spectacular group, the enantiornithes. This group is also known as the enantiornithines, or the enantiornithians in the literature as well, but the correct name is enantiornithes. And it's a group of extinct aviolans. That's birds in the broad sense. So they're a sister group to modern birds. They're the most abundant bird group throughout the Cretaceous, from 130 million years ago until the extinction event, which is 64 million years, guys. That's about the same amount of time that modern birds have had, right? That's the same amount of time since the extinction event up till now. They were there, and they were evolving, and they were they were doing things that modern birds are also doing. And so, if you went back then and you went birding, I'm sure you'd have quite a few lifers. So yeah, it's the same amount of evolutionary time as modern birds, meaning the name in Antiornithes means opposite birds. The articulation between the scapula and the coracoid is opposite that observed in modern birds. One is like that, and the other one is like that. They cave, the rounded bit versus the ball bit is on opposite sides. This is sulcavus, one of those birds, and you can see it's got teeth on the jawbone, and you can see that it's a sister group to aves, but it's the most recent of the sister groups linked to modern aves. But they took evolution in slightly different directions from a common ancestor, and like the others, the Antiornithes didn't make it past the KTP extinction event. But there were some pretty amazing birds actually among them. These are obviously artists' impressions from fossils, from pigments, especially melanin crystals that are found in some of the fossils, and so on, just put together to indicate what these birds might have looked like. They may not have looked like this, but this is as close as we're probably going to get from looking at fossils and looking at the features of the birds and comparing the features of those fossils with modern birds to try and get a sense of what they might have done. And so this is Longipteryx. It's a long-billed frugivore, so it eats fruit. Now, there wasn't probably wasn't a lot of fruit around when these birds were first evolving, because angiosperms were just getting a kickstart back then as well. And then there's Bohyornis, a carnivore with a kind of raptorial ecology. So it basically was like a colorful eagle or a colorful raptor of some kind anyway. And we know these things from the arrangement of the bones, the type of feet it has, the structure of the wings that are, that show that it can fly fast, etc. And then there's this interesting one, Pangornis, which was a small little bird that fed on arthropods and other hard invertebrates, and probably had a strong bill for biting them open. And these guys would probably, in my driveway this afternoon, the termite elates were coming out, and there were many species of birds there, more than 20 species probably, all feeding on these termites. And so, this bird probably would have been right at home there. So look at some of their features. The articulation of the shoulder bones is obviously in Antiornithes has a convex coracoid and a concave scapula, and modern birds have a concave coracoid and a convex scapula. That's why they're called opposite birds. An inventive name for them. Early growth and development, the Antiornithes were highly precocial. They pretty much came out of the egg and behaved like a bird. They had a well-ossified skeleton, fully developed remiges, flight feathers, fully developed and independent and capable of flight within a day, within the first day after hatching. Compare that to modern birds, which are almost invariably highly altricial. They've got a weakly ossified skeleton. Their bones haven't yet hardened and formed up properly. They've got underdeveloped feathers. They have to molt some of those feathers before they can become adults and start flying. They're pretty helpless when they hatch, and they have an extended dependence on parental care. And I got to see that again out in my driveway today as well, because a lot of the birds were picking up those termites and giving them to the young ones, to their offspring that have already fledged but are still being taken care of by the parents. The beak, the Enantiornithes had teeth in the jaws, and modern birds don't. The Enantiornithes had clawed fingers on the wings, and modern birds generally don't. There's only one species, as far as I know, that has claws on the wings. And then their tails, the Enantiornithes, were typically long rod sorry, let me try that again. Their tails were long, and they had a rod or dagger-shaped pygostyle. So something like my little tool here, a long one with vertebrae, not the pyramidal or plowshare-shaped one that modern birds have, and so that only purpose of that pygostyle is to host the feathers, basically, and the muscles that move those feathers around. So let's look at some more of these up close. Early Cretaceous Enantiornithines probably were specialized for arboreal environments, tree environments, and this is an important factor that may have led to the demise of most of the species during the K to P extinction event. But by the late Cretaceous, there were other lifestyles in existence, including some that secondarily lost their flight ability, and they probably behave very similar to some of the flightless birds that we have today. These are from a paper by Jigmai O'Connor, and she had an artist do these beautiful diagrams, beautiful paintings, and so we can look at each of those and see what some of these how these birds looked. So Sulcavus lived 121 to 125 million years ago in the early Cretaceous. It's the first known inornithian bird with a ornamented tooth enamel. Not the first known bird, the first known bird with the ornamented tooth enamel. It had a groove in the tooth enamel, and that's where the name succulus comes from, means groove. So it's groovy bird. And it has very sharp teeth in the bill, and it has these two tail feathers that stick out. And those two tail feathers are not going to help much with flight, hey? And then there's Avimaya, which also lived in the early Cretaceous. And this one was found with an egg between the pubic bones, and probably represents the first discovery of a fossilized bird egg. And given that it hasn't got a tail and it has an egg, it suggests that maybe the male might be more ornamented, and this could be a good example of early evolution of sexual selection. And then there's Longipteryx, which has got these really odd-looking teeth at the front. Also early Cretaceous, probably was frugivorous, and it probably ate gymnosperm seeds, and it didn't have gastroliths that you would expect if it was grinding up other kinds of food. And it's got this very distinctive long bill with curved teeth at the end of it. Then there's Phocatekli, which has got a bit of a tail with some extra feathers that stick out the back. And this one was much more recent. It was in the Upper Cretaceous, sort of leading up to a couple of million years before the K to P extinction event. And it was found as a fossil in what's now Madagascar. It's a crow-sized bird with a deep, long rostrum bill that is reminiscent of a toucan and might have had a similar kind of lifestyle. And then there's Fetianus, which is, I think, one of the coolest of the enantiornithines. And this one also comes from the early Cretaceous, which surprised me. I was expecting it to be later because it shows very clear sexual dimorphism in the tail feathers, and that's a very well developed sexual dimorphism. So it's likely that we don't know yet because we haven't seen that many fossils, even though we've got a massive haul from J-hole biota in that area, but it's still a relatively small number of individual birds of any particular species. But it does show that sexual selection was a thing in early enantiornithines. And then there's Oriantius, which is also from the early Cretaceous, about the same size as a medium lark, so it's not a huge bird. It showed evidence that it was capable of very high maneuverability because of its wings. It's got these sort of swallow, swift-shaped wings that showed that it could maneuver quite well in the air. Don't know what that means. It might have been an insectivore that fed on flying insects or flying invertebrates. And this one is an interesting one because this is one of the first birds that has been found that is clearly living a raptorial lifestyle. In other words, it catches prey with its feet. And it comes from the late Cretaceous, and it's from North America and South America, so from the what would eventually become the New World. The morphology of the foot is what's used to suggest that it's had a raptorial behavior and could carry fairly large prey. Okay, so that's some of the birds from the Cretaceous and what they look like. Now, let's look at some of the other key features of birds. When did the birds get toothless bills? So this is another, I'm sorry, I keep presenting Jingmai O'Connor papers, but she's the one who does the most work on this, and she's the one who summarizes it for ordinary people like me, and she's even written some children's books on the evolution of birds. So if we look back, we can see that the Confucius ornithus, yeah, I'm going to be another 15 minutes, I'm afraid. The Confucius ornithiformes had toothless bills, and the Neornithes have toothless bills today. And all the other birds had bills with teeth. And this was 120 million years ago, and that's what the Confucius ornithus looked like. Also, these two long tail feathers and a relatively short tail, and a toothless bill. And we look at the genetics of this, we find that all modern birds have the same gene that deactivates the formation of teeth. So modern birds actually have a gene to form teeth, and they have another gene that deactivates it. And so it's probably a single gene that affected all modern birds. And the DNA sequencing suggests that this happened about 100 million years ago. And the selection pressure was probably more rapid embryonic development. Growing teeth is complicated. Also better for certain types of foods, especially seeds. And remember that after the extinction event, probably the birds that survived were the ones that could eat things like seeds, things that were left lying around that didn't need plants to be growing, because for a long time, plants didn't grow. And so we look at this, and we look at Confucius ornithiformes, and we see that this is obviously convergent evolution. They lost their teeth independently of one another. And if we look here, this Ichthyoniformes, they also had teeth, and they were also on the line that leads up to the Neornithes. So it seems like there's more work needed here to precisely determine when modern birds lost their teeth, but it's quite a long time ago, well before the K to P extinction event. Yeah, work needed there. And interestingly, sometimes birds get teeth back, but they're not teeth; they're actually pseudo teeth. So this bird, lived from the Oligocene to the early Pleistocene, Pelagornis chiliensis, got teeth, but their teeth are just horn from the bill. It's not teeth that actually grew as like our teeth do. So when did the gizzard arrive? Another feature of birds, right? A muscular stomach, a muscular thick-walled part of a bird's stomach for grinding food. Typically, birds swallow stones, and the muscles grind the food. And the evidence suggests that this was there in non-avian theropods like Anchiornis, and that provides evidence that the birds inherited the gizzard from their theropod ancestors, making it a primitive trait for birds. But birds probably took it and enhanced it through natural selection, like everything does. And when did birds start singing? That's obviously an interesting conversation, because you often hear people say dinosaurs probably chirped like a bird. Well, we have no evidence of that. But birds are able to sing because of an organ called the syrinx. It's a specialized organ for sound production. It's in the windpipes of birds, and it's located at the point where the trachea divides into the two bronchi that lead into the lungs. And the interesting thing about these is it uses these vibrating membranes and the air coming out of those pipes. So it's the breathing pipes, but it doesn't have to do both of them at the same time. So it can sing and breathe at the same time by just singing through one. And for many birds, they can actually control these two muscles independently and actually sing two sounds at the same time. And you actually sometimes hear that in birds. You hear them like, how is it producing that sound? Because there's actually two different sounds overlaying one another. That's how it does it. So the earliest known fossil syrinx dates to between 69 and 66 million years ago. So a relatively short period. Well, 3 million years is not a short period, but a relatively short period before the KP extinction event. And that's the first known syrinx. And it was in this aquatic bird, Vigorous ei. And a complex syrinx might have arisen late in the evolution of birds then. At least that's what we think, but keep in mind that the syrinx is hardly ever found in fossils. So that's the most recent timeline. It could have evolved much earlier, and we wouldn't know because this doesn't preserve in fossils. But that was a couple of months ago. 2 months ago, another paper came out, and it showed that a Neornithian dinosaur, one of the lines that is aside from modern birds, had a structure that, and you can see this doesn't look like a bird, right? It had a structure that resembles modern birds in the way in which the laryngeal elements are put together. So it's possible that singing goes well back before birds, but we don't know yet, and the evidence is not all in. And then the origin of modern groups of birds. Yeah, so there's a lot going on in this diagram here, but we're going to look at this line here, the Enantiornithes, which they didn't make it through the great filter of the K to P extinction, the asteroid that knocked out so much of life on Earth at the time. And then the line that led up to the modern birds had also some branches that didn't make it through, but some branches did make it through, and those became the modern birds. So the line of modern birds and the branches that give rise to modern birds, the four different branches that give rise to modern birds, existed before the extinction event. And where the blue line is positioned here is not an indication of certainty as to exactly where the branching happened. I suspect it was a little bit further back than what these lines show, but that's how modern birds, or that's where modern birds came from, and the groups that led to modern birds existed already by the time the extinction event happened. So the summary of what I'm going to talk about here is that the enantiornithes didn't make it through. The ornithomorpha were the line that leads to the neoaves, that long line that I showed you with the long green line leading up to the blue line. And the major lines of modern birds existed well before the mass extinction. So yeah, sorry, dude, you didn't make it either. So what are the lineages since then? And we're getting ready to finish up now. The lineages since the end of the Cretaceous extinction, there were the ancestors, that the lower part of the blue line, and they gave rise to two different lineages: the Paleognathes and the Neognathes, the old jaws and the new jaws. It's got to do with the bone structure of the jaws. I'm not going to go into that. You don't need to know it. It won't be on the exam. And the Paleognathes are things like the ostrich, the emu, the various other, a lot of flightless birds, tinamous in South America, etc. They are all Paleognathes, and so their ancestors already had a line formed before the K2P mass extinction event. And then the Neognathes divided into two groups: the Gallinocerai, the fowl group, which includes Anseriformes, ducks and geese and things like swans and all of those things, and the Galliformes, things like the guinea fowl, the francolins, spur fowl, the jungle fowl, anything with the word fowl in their name, probably. Peacocks, all of those things are part of that group. And then the big group of birds, the neoaves, which is all the other birds. So all of these lines existed before the extinction event, and they survived. And none of the other groups made it through that filter. So they made it from the Mesozoic era into the Cenozoic era, which is what we're in now. And I could go on and on about this stuff here, but this is the division of the Cenozoic era, and this is where almost all of the modern bird evolution took place after that K2P extinction event. And there was another extinction event, a minor extinction event, at the end of the Eocene as well, that also was a filter for modern birds. And of course, we are here now, probably bringing the Neogene to a close with our own extinction, our own contribution to extinctions. So all surviving birds were likely ground-dwelling or coastal, because they didn't have to have trees, because all of the trees were gone. The trees burned down. There was no photosynthesis for up to a decade, if not more. But afterwards, many ecological niches were empty, and ecological niches, as you probably know, aren't just features of the environment, they're features of the biota as well. So there was an explosive diversification in all four of these lineages that made it through the extinction event. And some prominent flightless birds like the terror bird, became top predators. They were the lions of their day because there weren't other top predators in those environments. So lots of weird things happened in this time. So let's just quickly look at half a dozen or 10 bird groups and see when they evolved in this history. There was a lot of climate shifts, plate tectonic impacts, and changing patterns among birds and mammals that drove all of this stuff. But swifts are one of the oldest groups. They may even predate the K to P extinction. And they're closely related to hummingbirds, which came about 42 million years ago. Then eagles came on the scene, evolving from kites about 36 million years ago. And kingfishers 27 million years ago. Guinea fowl 23 million years ago. Modern ostriches 20 million years ago. Crows 17 million years ago. Buntings 10 million years ago. And my beloved larks only a little over 2.5 million years ago. So that's the story of the evolution of birds in the Mesozoic, and what got through the great filter of the K to P extinction, and some of the things that happened more recently. If you decide that you're going to take your time machine and go back to the Mesozoic, you need this book. It's a field guide to the birds of the Mesozoic. It's a really interesting book. I had the privilege of having a library copy for a little while. I don't own it because it's freaking expensive. And that's it. So yeah, are you all that's left of us? Not of you, but of theropods, yes. So that's it. If you guys need to find me, there's my contact information there. And hopefully this has been an interesting little journey through the Mesozoic.
Thank you very much. This is fantastic and interesting, very informative. I felt like I should have a notebook. I should have had a notebook. But yeah, ladies and gents, please, any questions, now's the time. A lot of plaudits, a lot of applause. Yes, I agree. Could have carried on for another hour.
Yeah, I guess I did go about 10 minutes or 15 minutes over, so.
No, no worries. I have a question here from Kim Daniels. How do we know that the individual fossils are the male and female of the same species?
So that's a very good question. I mean, I think that, you know, we don't have the benefit of behavior, but we do have the benefit of characteristics that relate to, you know, whether an animal, whether a bird is male or female or not, can be determined if you have enough bone structure, because the females that lay eggs often take calcium out of the bone, and this isn't something that they, you know, that they do as a last resort. This is it's built into them. It's a normal physiological thing. Calcium is stored in the bone for use to make eggs, and so that shows up in the microstructure of the bones. And whether you know they are the same species or not, I guess is a thing that you'd have to guess. But if you find a bird that has got the same bone structure that indicates male, and another one that indicates female, you are reasonably justified, I think, to suggest that they are male and female of the same species. But you could be wrong. It's like anything in paleontology, right? You have to deduce from what you have. Sometimes what you have is like one bone, you know.
Of course. Thank you. Any other questions? Doesn't seem that way, unless someone is typing a long question.
All right, then I think we can probably say good night. And I can go eat my supper.
Yes, I'm having my lunch right now. So thank you everyone for coming. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Derek. And I have, is there a raised hand from Leslie?
You should be able to unmute somebody if you want.
Let me see. No, I can't unmute anyone else.
Seems like I can't either. I can't unmute someone else. That's weird.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, I'm not sure, but you know, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to contact Derek directly. And this will be available on YouTube, yeah?
Yes, it will. I'll see what I can do to clean up the places where the font was wonky, but yeah.
Yeah, that's probably a few hours work there.
Yeah, so that will take a while because my daughter is visiting from Canada at the moment. We're going to Kruger National Park for the weekend, long weekend. So it won't be tomorrow.
All right. Sounds good. No problem. Well, thank you again, everyone. And I think that's all from us. So
Yeah.
have a-
Oh, and one last thing. There is a talk in December. It's a little earlier in December, and it's going to be on hornbills, ground hornbills, and it's going to be a really interesting talk. I can guarantee that.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night. Thanks, Faraz. Bye-bye.